When Adolf Eichmann sat in the courtroom, one of the architects of the Holocaust, the world was prepared to see a monster. What they saw instead was a man with glasses, a nervous smile, and a bureaucrat's obsession with following procedure. And that's when philosopher Hannah Arendt saw something far more terrifying than evil itself. She saw how horror is enabled not by monsters, but by people who think they're doing their job. He wasn't angry, he wasn't ideological, he didn't feel like a villain, but he still helped orchestrate the deaths of millions because he followed the rules, because he obeyed, because he stopped thinking. And Arendt realized the greatest threat to humanity is not hatred, it's the absence of thought. In 1961, Hannah Arendt, a German Jewish philosopher and refugee from the Nazis, was sent to Jerusalem by The New Yorker to cover the trial of Adolf Eichmann. Eichmann wasn't just any Nazi. He was one of the central organizers of the Final Solution, responsible for coordinating the transport of millions of Jews to extermination camps. And yet, when Arendt saw him speak, something felt off. He didn't look like a zealot. He didn't express hatred. He rambled in shallow, bureaucratic language, saying he only followed orders and never personally harmed anyone. It would have been easier if he had screamed hatred. It would have made more sense if he had seemed possessed by evil. Instead, he seemed painfully average, terrifyingly normal, she called it. And that became her most controversial idea. Evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like a middle manager. She called it the banality of evil, the ordinary face of extraordinary horror. This wasn't about excusing Eichmann, it was about diagnosing a deeper threat. Because if Eichmann wasn't a sadist, if he was just a man doing his job, then what does that say about all of us? Arendt argued that evil thrives not in chaos, but in systems. And within systems, people often stop thinking. They delegate morality to their role. They obey policies, obey orders, obey culture, and believe they're doing good. This is why Arendt feared the average citizen more than the fanatic, because the fanatic shows his face, but the obedient citizen smiles politely while participating in atrocities. The essence of totalitarian government is that it destroys the juridical person in man. That is, it makes you forget you are responsible for your own actions. Responsibility gets passed up the chain, guilt becomes diluted, and evil slips in quietly, hidden behind paperwork, protocol, and politeness. This isn't just about history, it's about how we behave at work, on social media, in society, because once you stop thinking, evil doesn't need to corrupt you, it only needs you to comply. For centuries, we've been taught that obedience is a virtue. Children are praised for being obedient. Employees are rewarded for being team players. Citizens are admired when they follow the law. But Arendt exposed the sinister underbelly of this mindset. In a totalitarian system, obedience is the lubricant of atrocity. It removes friction. It removes doubt. It removes you. And in Eichmann's case, it allowed a man who had no personal hatred, no grand ideological plan, to send millions to their death simply because it was his job. He used cliché phrases, he repeated slogans, he cited duty and loyalty. But what he didn't do was think. The sad truth, Arendt wrote, is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. This wasn't a cop-out, it was a scream, an alarm bell that anyone under the right conditions can become an accomplice to evil by failing to think critically. And this wasn't just a theory. Arendt's ideas were later echoed, terrifyingly, in Stanley Milgram's obedience experiments at Yale. In those experiments, ordinary people were told by an authority figure to deliver electric shocks to another person, and most of them did, even as the victim screamed in pain. Why? Because the man in the lab coat said so, because they wanted to be good, rule-following, obedient, just like Eichmann. Arendt wasn't just analyzing a man, she was holding up a mirror to the world and asking, when do you stop thinking for yourself, and when does that surrender make you dangerous? In Arendt's eyes, the true crime of modern evil wasn't just action, it was abandoning judgment. She believed every human has a two-in-one inside them, a kind of inner dialogue between the self and the self. It's what allows us to reflect, doubt, and take moral responsibility. But in totalitarian systems, or even in rigid corporate cultures, this inner conversation dies. You stop asking, is this right? You start asking, is this allowed? You stop wondering, do I believe this? You start reciting, this is what we do here. That's when the inner voice gets replaced by the outer one. And the scariest part, it often feels comfortable, because certainty is easier than doubt, rules are easier than judgment, and letting someone else decide feels safer than thinking for yourself. But Arendt warned, once that inner dialogue dies, you become hollow. You may still function, go to work, pay your bills, follow the rules, but you've lost something sacred, the capacity to say no, even when the world says yes. When was the last time you did something just because that's the way it is? And what if that moment, quiet, small, forgettable, was the exact moment evil got a little closer? One of Arendt's most radical insights was this: evil doesn't need chaos. It thrives in normalcy. During Eichmann's trial, what shocked Arendt wasn't only what he did, but how boring he seemed while doing it. He wasn't a monster. He didn't have a sadistic grin. He didn't rant like a movie villain. He was polite, orderly, bureaucratic. And this disturbed Arendt more than anything, because it meant you don't need rage or hatred to commit horror. You just need a system and a man willing to follow the script. What this reveals is terrifying. You can go to work, you can follow the rules, you can clock in, clock out, and still be part of something unspeakable, because horror doesn't always look like a battlefield. Sometimes it looks like an office, a boardroom, a spreadsheet. And this is exactly what made the machinery of Nazi Germany so effective. The killing wasn't done by monsters. It was enabled by managers. Each person did their job. One typed names, one scheduled trains, one signed papers, and together they murdered millions without ever having to face a corpse. Arendt saw this and realized, when evil becomes efficient, it becomes invisible. And when it becomes invisible, it becomes unstoppable. But how do good people get pulled into these systems? Why do people who love their families, who read bedtime stories, who smile at strangers, end up enabling horror? Arendt's answer is brutally honest: because they want to belong. Belonging is one of the deepest human needs, and totalitarian systems, whether political or cultural, exploit this ruthlessly. They offer a simple narrative, a clear enemy, a role to play, a group to be part of, and in exchange they ask for just one thing: your independence of thought. Many people accept this bargain, not because they're evil, but because it feels good to be part of something bigger than themselves. But Arendt warns, under conditions of tyranny, it is far easier to act than to think, because thought requires solitude, courage, the willingness to stand alone, and for most people, that's too heavy a price. So they go along, not with malice, but with fear, not out of cruelty, but out of the desperate desire not to be excluded. They don't realize, in trying to belong, they become part of something far worse. You think you're staying quiet to keep the peace, but what if your silence is the very thing feeding the monster? Arendt's most controversial and perhaps most misunderstood idea was this: Eichmann didn't commit atrocities because he was evil. He committed them because he refused to think. Not because he lacked intelligence, but because he avoided moral reflection. He followed orders, followed procedures, followed the crowd, but he never stopped to ask, is this right? This is what Arendt called thoughtlessness. And she didn't mean ignorance. She meant the refusal to engage one's conscience, the deliberate decision to turn off your moral radar. You see, real thinking, the kind Arendt meant, isn't about knowledge. It's about inner dialogue. It's that moment when you sit alone and ask, what do I believe? Am I doing harm? Would I still do this if no one told me to? And Arendt believed this kind of reflection is what makes us human, because without it, We're just machines in human form, she wrote. The sad truth is that most evil is done by people who never make up their minds to be good or evil. In other words, the worst horrors come not from those who choose evil, but from those who choose nothing at all. They just drift, they comply, they obey, and in their passivity, they become the system. So what's the antidote? If totalitarian systems thrive on blind obedience, what breaks the spell? Arendt's answer is judgment, not the kind that condemns others, but the kind that dares to think for itself. She called this the faculty of judgment, the inner ability to say, I don't care what everyone else is doing, this feels wrong to me. And this is harder than it sounds, because in real life, judgment often means going against the crowd, being misunderstood, facing consequences, standing alone. But Arendt believed this was the only real defense against mass complicity, and she found hope in the rare individuals who did it, people who disobeyed, who questioned, who refused, not because they were saints, but because they had the courage to think for themselves. In a world full of Eichmanns, polite, passive, obedient, Arendt placed her hope in the few who dared to judge, even if they paid a price for it. But there's something even more disturbing Arendt saw. A truth about evil that had nothing to do with politics and everything to do with you. It's easy to point at Eichmann and say he was the problem, he was different, he was evil. But that's exactly what Arendt warned against. The horror isn't that he was different, it's that he wasn't. Eichmann wasn't a monster in the traditional sense. He wasn't frothing with rage or hatred. He didn't love violence. He didn't even seem particularly ideological. He was a normal man, doing a job, fulfilling a role, following orders, and that's what makes it terrifying. Because if evil were committed only by monsters, we'd be safe. We'd just avoid the monsters. But what if evil can come from those who look just like us, who speak like us, who go to work like us, who follow rules just like we're told to? Arendt's theory wasn't about Eichmann, it was about us. The way we abdicate moral responsibility, the way we outsource our conscience, the way we hide behind the comfort of systems, rules, authority, expectations. And the longer we do that, the more likely we are to look back one day and realize we were complicit, because we were afraid to ask questions, because we chose silence over conflict, because we thought, it's not my job, or worse, everyone else is doing it. This is the banality of evil, not horror from hatred, but horror from habit. And in this sense, Arendt was not warning us about Eichmann, she was warning us about ourselves. So how do you avoid becoming part of the machine? Arendt's answer wasn't to rage or revolt blindly, or become a hero. It was more subtle, but harder. Stay human. Think for yourself, judge for yourself, feel your own reactions, even when they don't match the group. And above all, refuse to stop thinking. Arendt saw that the moment we hand over our inner voice to a system, a leader, a party, or even just convenience, we start to lose something essential. And when enough people do that, you don't need evil leaders anymore. You just need a culture of thoughtlessness, and evil will take care of itself. So the real question isn't, would I have resisted back then? The real question is, am I resisting now? If there's one myth Arendt shattered forever, it's this: only bad people do bad things. Because what she discovered in the trial room, and what she saw again and again in history, was far more unsettling. Sometimes it's the good people, the ones who obey, follow the rules, keep their heads down, who become the most reliable tools of horror, not because they want evil, but because they fear standing out, because they feel powerless, because they trust the system, because they're afraid of the cost of thinking for themselves. This is the great deception we live with, that decency is the same as morality, that being polite, cooperative, and efficient is enough, that as long as we don't intend harm, we are free of responsibility. But Arendt's work tears that illusion apart, because what she saw wasn't evil committed by monsters, it was committed by bureaucrats, by neighbors, by clerks, by average people. And this doesn't mean we should live in guilt. It means we should live awake. It means we can no longer say, "It's not my responsibility. I was just doing my job." That's the system's fault. Because every time we do, we become a little more like the machine, a little more like Eichmann, a little more like the thing we fear. Arendt believed the only way out was to become what she called ethically dangerous. Not dangerous in the violent sense, dangerous because you think when others follow, because you question when others obey, because you feel when others numb themselves, because you listen to your conscience more than your orders. The truly good person in Arendt's philosophy isn't the one who gets the most approval. It's the one who's willing to be hated, if that's what it takes to stay human. It's the one who risks discomfort, exclusion, and even punishment, just to avoid betraying the truth. It's the one who understands that silence is not neutral, that passivity is not innocence, that neutrality in the face of cruelty is a choice, and always a dangerous one. To be ethically dangerous is to refuse to disappear into the system. It is to stand even shaking and say, "This isn't right, and I won't be part of it," even if no one else does. Hannah Arendt didn't give us a list of rules. She gave us a mirror, and what we see in it, what we choose to do with it, is entirely up to us. Because every generation tells itself, we would have been different, we would have seen it, we would have stopped it. But Arendt's voice whispers something else, only if you're willing to see it now. So here's the question only you can answer. Are you living thoughtfully, or are you just functioning? If you are ready, write in the comments, "I choose to live consciously," and share your thoughts. Your reflection might just wake someone else up too. And if this video made you feel something real, give it a like, so it reaches others who need to hear this. For more bold, soul-cutting psychology like this, join our community of people walking towards the light. Subscribe and click the notification bell to never miss new insights. Until next time, keep shining, not to be seen, but to see.